Hello and welcome to the Essence of You podcast. I am your host, Steph Localani, and I'm here today with my friend Nichole Stull, and we are about to dive into some deep conversation. This is going to be fun.
That's good. Color balance will be good.
This was the color palette that was assigned to us today.
Steph sent me a picture of her glasses, and I said, got you. Oh, man. On a couple of movies I've done, I'm so particular. Like, if I'm doing wardrobe and stuff, which I don't always, like, more often I've done the production design set and whatever. But there are times, especially on, like, indie stuff, where I'm also doing, whether it's commercial or, like, a film, whatever. I'm also figuring out all the clothing. And I'm on purpose about it.
Uh-huh.
And I'm mostly on purpose. I'm on purpose about colors and styles, but colors. Because I feel like, in general, I don't really care what the thing is that you're wearing so much as the color fits into the palette.
Yes.
Because it's the overall look to me.
Yes.
And it's the overall, like, when I did 259 with Cody, it's like there's a demon, right, that's influencing. And it goes from one family to the other family, and then there's another family. So there's 3 different families here, and we're inside all of their homes and all of their clothes. And so the demon being red, the one family has, like, is very earthy and white and light. Mm-hmm. And then the other family is kind of, not that they're dark, but they're, they were in, like, kind of a mid, like, blues, purples, and it just the reds slowly transition across to everybody. And it happens in clothing, even in all my extras during the school scenes and stuff. Like, that's what I wanted, was to have the colors wherever the demon is touching, that it's more that color starts to pervade. And I mean, that's something probably nobody watching it would be like, oh, I saw this. But that is what I did, because if I have to make a choice, why don't I make a choice that has a point?
Yes, I agree.
So,
wow.
Anyway, that was where I was at.
I'll tell you who would notice. Other filmmakers.
Well, maybe. Depends on which part they care about. That's the funny thing I've noticed about filmmakers. Like, because when you're on a set that has enough money that they fully flesh out their crew and all the positions, they appreciate the fact that there is somebody there in each department.
Yes.
As the budget gets smaller, appreciation for various departments diminishes. And then it starts to really, like, how they feel about you on set. A lot of it starts to come down to, like, what they care about, where their specialty is.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And how it interacts with you, right? So, like, if they super care about the camera and how something looks, what the shot is like, they may really care about the set, or maybe they just care about the angles and the lighting.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly it'll be angles and lighting, but, and so it's just, if they're doing more wides, or they care more about the storytelling that's in the picture, and they're not trying to, close-ups, well, then they're going to care way more about how your set is.
Yes.
Or if they came from the art department somewhere, some side on the production design, then they're going to care more about that. And so it is interesting to kind of watch. But, like, when you look at more studio films and films that are bigger, they always have more wides than anybody I feel like, an indie. We just don't get those shots. We don't get the whole establishing.
Well,
yeah.
And I think some of it has to do with time and budget.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. Because especially if you're working, like, with one camera, you have to go back and redo all these shots. If you want that close up, you want that. And I know from my own experience doing stuff with very little budget and, one camera person, you're like, okay, we're going to do establishing. So we're going to run through the whole scene. Now we're going to move. Oh, wait, nope. Hold on. We don't have time for that.
Yeah. Right. And, like, we get in and we get up there close-ups because we need that coverage. And we expect that, like, we're so used to, the over-the-shoulder shots and being able to get those close-up coverage of whatever acting is happening. And it is not that it's not important. Of course, it's important to the storytelling. But we don't plan half a day for the wide, getting that whole shot. But like some of even the bigger budget indie movies that I love, like, have you seen The Map of Tiny Perfect Things?
No.
It's so good. It's on Prime. And it's just an interesting story. And one of the things I love about it so much, well, I don't want to give anything away, but it's a kid who is reliving the same day.
Oh, wow.
And he's just it's like Groundhog Day, but it's in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So he knows what's happening already. He knows every day. He knows where he's going to fix something. He knows, and he's dealing with some stuff he's trying to figure out. And he comes across somebody and realizes they are also reliving the same day. And so he wants to figure out, is aware that she's reliving this same day.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to figure out, with her, can we get out of this? Why are we in this loop? What's happening? And it's so good. But I think about that movie and I loved it. And I think, man, I'd love to make a movie like that. Why would I want to make a movie like that? And I love the message and the overall story. But when I say message, I'll come back to that because I don't mean it like how most people think. But I love the story. It's well acted and it's beautifully shot. It's so interesting. The story is interesting. The plot follows things and there are things you don't expect. And then it does something that we very rarely see ever in any storytelling.
Okay, I need to watch
so
this.
It's probably about 3/4 of the way through. I was like, oh, it's a plot device. I don't want to say it's a plot device. It's a storytelling device that most people may not even realize what happened. But when it happens, it is like a jaw dropper for me. It was really, and Jared's like, I know, that's why I wanted you to watch it. I'm like, okay. But so it's innovative a little bit and different in how it tells the story. But what I mean about the message of the story, when we're doing improv, I teach people storytelling all the time. And we use a lot of improv tools when we teach acting, when we're teaching storytelling, but we also do applied improv where we take a whole bunch of improv things and bring them into other parts of the world because improv is about not knowing what comes next and what action are you going to take, which is pretty much 100% of life. So that's why it is applicable across everything, right? And when you're doing improv with a group of people, which is what we do every day, that is why it is so applicable. And that's why Fortune 500 companies use it. And, everybody, it is getting to be something that people are recognizing. But anyway, so we love applied improv. So sometimes I'm taking the tools that we have from improv and pulling them in. And sometimes I'm just taking the principles, so the things we've learned through improv and taking them in. And but this is a tool that we use this tool a lot. Pixar started using this tool and it came from an improviser. His name is Ken Adams. It's called Story Spine.
Okay.
And he was teaching it to improvisers, I think in Chicago in the 90s-ish. And his name is Ken Adams, which is always funny to Jared and I because I don't know if you watch Friends, but Joey, his fake name is Ken Adams.
Is it really?
And they're like, no, I heard it from some guy. Some guy. No, his name. It must be. Anyway, but this guy's name really is Ken Adams. And he, I always wonder if somebody knew that on Friends.
I bet they probably did.
Because he taught all these people and then they went to writers' rooms everywhere. That's why Pixar is using. Do you know what I mean? And so I think that's a huge part of it. But anyway, his whole thing is once upon a time there was a who, and then you kind of establish their where and their when and what happens every day for them. Until one day, and then something changes. And then there's tilts that are happening that are changing. And Jared and I have really leaned into it because we've taught it a lot. And we've taught it for people who are trying to become better storytellers, like public speakers and that kind of stuff. So a lot of times in our stories, we'll have something that changes. And then how do we respond to that? And so Ken Adams' verbiage that he uses is because of that. So until one day this happens, and then because of that, and then because of that, because of that, because of that, and you can do that all the way down to the end of the story. And for Jared and I mean, sometimes it'll be a suddenly, or elsewhere or whatever, we might jump around in our story or we have different characters or whatnot, but it always comes back to we are responding to the circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
We are trying to level the change that just happened. How do we level that? And we keep doing that all the way until finally, and then you get your final response, your final action. And then now every day looks like this. And that's a pretty standard, easy storytelling framework. You can see it through, like, Pixar shorts are brilliant for it. We talk about, lighting changes show us tilts. Music changes show us tilts. Obviously, anything that happens on the camera can be a change. Our words can change things. But so we see all these different kinds of stories. And then at the end, and now every day, here's what life is like, da-da-da. So a lot of times people will then talk about, like, well, what was the message? And I remember being in school, and it was just starting to happen for me. And I was in high school in the 90s, where it was like, well, what was the author trying to say?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I don't know. And I'm like, did you read the book? I'm like, yeah, I read the book. So what was the author trying to say? I don't know, because you haven't given me an interview to read or watch with the author. So I can't answer that question for you. And as an AP student in high school, everybody just thought I was being a smart mouth. But the reality is, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you what message I got, what moral I got, what lesson I learned from a story. But that is 100% based on my perspective, my thinking, my life experience. And that is what I noticed. And so when we expect a receiver to get the message that we want them to, sometimes, obviously, there's stories that are like a historical story where, yes, I mean, most of us are going to watch a story like maybe Schindler's List and go,
okay,
Holocaust was bad.
Mm-hmm.
There was terrible things that happened.
Mm-hmm.
That's a message they wanted us to get. We all received that, right?
Yes.
But as far as, like, what principles am I taking into my life? What lesson did I learn? That's going to be different for every single person.
It is. That reminds me when I did film school for my bachelor's program, and my thesis film was made by me for women, and you can get what you want out of it. I'm not going to explain it to you. And those are the types of films I like to watch and make. And one of my professors, who happened to be a man, he watched it and he was like, I don't get it. And he gave me a bad grade. And I was like, well, you're not my target audience. And he was like, yeah, but this is school. And if I don't get it, and I was like, no, hold up. You're not my target audience. Please rewatch it, understanding that, and then tell me what my grade might be.
Yeah.
And that was, I don't remember if he ever rewatched it. I did graduate valedictorian, so it doesn't matter what grade I got on that. But it was one of those things. And then that same film was accepted into a very women-centric film festival.
Of course.
Because they got it.
Well, it's like making a beautiful chocolate creation and then asking somebody who doesn't eat chocolate to tell you how good it is.
Yeah.
That's silly. It doesn't make sense. We don't make things for every person.
No.
That being said, I think that one of my big things that I talk about with people, so like I was just teaching a summer camp with teenagers a little while ago, and some of it was they were devising their own play. And it was based on a Shakespeare play, but they still are devising, like, they've pulled it into a modern day circumstance, and then what elements are we going to pull in, and how are we going to relate them, and how do we get the story from there to there, and all of those ththings, right? And one of the things I told him is, I'm like, listen, in storytelling, you can, let me give an example. This is what I always tell, like, I actually do that way. If I'm telling you a story and there's a cowboy, he's riding on his horse and he's riding through the desert, and it is hot and sweltering, and he can hear the little crickets every now and then, but there's mostly not a lot of brush around, and it's a lot of dry packed sand, and his horse is riding, and he's hot and sweating, and his horse is getting overheated, and he's going, and he kind of comes up over this little bluff, and as he comes down, he sees the alien, and then he's like, and everybody in the room is like, wait, what? Because I am setting the stage of a Western. And so now we're like, what? There's an alien, which incidentally is kind of how I felt in a couple of films, right? But if I tell you, he is sweltering, and he kind of comes up over this bluff, and as he comes over, he sees in the distance, there's this massive storm rolling in, and it is coming fast, and he realizes, I cannot be out here for this. He sees lightning, and he's like, I got to get somewhere shelter. And he kind of looks over as he comes down, and there's kind of some rock formations, and he thinks maybe there will be a place over there. And he goes over and he finds this cave, and he goes in, and there's just enough room for him to go in, and his horse is standing kind of in the entrance, and they're both a little protected. And he gets back there, and he's sitting and just kind of thinking, I'm just going to wait out this kind of monsoony storm that's coming through. And the lightning's flashing. And when the lightning flashes, he sees kind of a weird thing on the wall. And he's like, what is that? He goes over and looks at it, and he sees some marks, and what is that? And so when the lightning flashes again, he hurries and he's rubbing it to try to see. And as he rubs it, it starts to glow, and he can see this writing is coming through, and it's glowing, and he starts to clear off more of the wall. And as it's glowing, he can see more and more in this room. And pretty soon the whole wall starts to shimmer. And then this being walks through the wall. Now, nobody is upset that there's an alien in the story because we set the stage for it, right? Like, we didn't make it weird. And so I always tell them, I'm like, you can have an alien in a Western, but you can't have an alien in a Western that you did not set it up for. Like, we need to get because of that's take us on a journey where you fill in those blanks. And there's another improv exercise called Strand of Pearls, where you take the very beginning of the story and the very end of a story, and then you have people fill in until the story gets complete.
Oh,
and they can fill in anywhere. But it's like a strand of pearls. We have to fill it all in. We don't want to have missing pearls in there. And so it might be like Joe and John Bob left on their bikes at the crack of dawn. That's the beginning of the story. And as they left the hospital, John Bob looked at John and said, or Joe, whatever, I don't know what his name was, I can't remember, and said, well, I think we learned a valuable lesson today. All right, there is our beginning and our end. Now, what are the steps in between? It really doesn't matter. Possibilities are endless.
Yes.
But if we throw an alien in when it doesn't make sense, the audience is going to have a visceral reaction of not, which we all want. Like, if you look at viewpoints theory, it's so awesome. Like, there's different ways of how we relate and how the audience is relating, and then what it looks like visually is part of it. But then there's kinesthetic response. And like, if our audience gasps, we want that. You know, if they cheer, we want that. We want them so involved in it that they have a response. But we want the response that's commiserate, I think that's the right word, but that is connected to what is happening, not to what doesn't make sense, where they go, wait, what? Because as soon as they, wait, what? They're out of your story.
They're out of it.
You can't, you don't have them anymore. You're not connected to them anymore. And so I feel really strongly about that as a storyteller. But again, I don't care what kind of story you tell. There can be a reason, a rhyme and a reason to it. And I've gotten really passionate about that, especially when it comes across to even like, I ran a book fair for 13 years for kids' school.
Oh my
just
gosh.
because it was my kids' school. And so I started doing it, and then just kept doing it. And I love it. I love reading. Jared loves reading. My dad loves reading. I've literally thousands of books. Like, we love reading. And so the book fair matters to me. And it's really been interesting to watch what kids want to read. And a lot of people lament, oh man, they're going to graphic novels. And I have some kids with dyslexia, and short sentences are easier for them to consume because it is a lot of work. Even with whatever coping tools and strategies they have to be able to read, a giant page of text is overwhelming. And so all of them have gotten to a point where they will read and they even like it. But to get there, they have to decide the story to get through it matters.
Yeah.
Because it's so hard to get through. And so there's a lot of research out there about different styles of books and reading is reading and what reading doesn't matter and blah. There's a group called, what is it called? Thomas Jefferson Education, I think. It's a homeschool philosophy and curriculum style that they do that is all based on mostly on reading and reading classics, reading good stuff to learn. But interestingly, I think it's the guy who started it. He's a college professor. And he was talking about, he has an article that I love so much. It's Beware the Anti-Readers. And he goes through and he talks about different types of anti-readers. And one of them is kind of the book snob who is an anti-reader. And I was like, what is that? It's so interesting. And he talks about how he had a class that he had multiple sessions of, 3 or 4, more than 2 for sure. And in one class, they were talking about literature. And in one class, they were talking about like what was kind of, cotton candy literature, whatever you want to call it. And he always talks about that with his class and talks about like why they read the selections he picks and that kind of stuff. But in this one class, they started a discussion about some popular authors, Louis L'Amour, a couple others, and they were talking about him. And he was like, oh yeah, and those qualified in his definitions of being that kind of superfluous type stuff. And so anyway, that was just the discussion they had. And it was very close at the beginning of the semester. And in the other classes, they didn't have that discussion. He's getting towards the end of the semester, and the class that they had that discussion in was doing worse across the board than everybody else.
Interesting.
And then any of the other classes. And he's like, what is happening right now? And what he found is that in interviewing and talking to the kids, the class that he had that discussion in, they all didn't read for pleasure during his class. They gave up all those all the very specific, because they talked about which ones those were, and so they didn't read them. And in the other classes, those students were still reading for pleasure as well. And it made even their book learning in the classics better.
Wow.
And he was like, at that point, he realized he really needed to not be that harsh about the type of reading, because reading is reading. And also when we're passionate about it, we're more excited about it. Our brain is going to work faster. We're going to take in more, which then means when we read something more difficult, we're also going to have those same things happening that will make us be able to take in more. Anyway, I thought that it's such an interesting article, and I'm like, man, and I've applied it across to all kinds of stories, But I remember, so this is a big confession.
Okay, go for it. I'm in.
So I've had times in my life when I haven't been a reader just because of busyness, right? But like I remember checking out just stacks of books at the library. I read every single Nancy Drew book and a bunch of the Hardy Boy books.
Drew.
And I read all the Sweet Valley High books. And I read like everything in the youth section that I could read. And back in the day, the young adult section didn't really exist, right? It was just youth, and there were not that many books in it.
Yeah.
And so I read everything. And I remember getting to the end of Sweet Valley High, and I was like, I've read everything there is to read. There's nothing left. And my dad was like, oh, Nichole. And he took me to the bookstore, and we bought a book off the shelf. It was a mystery that I was excited to read. And we got it, and I got home, and I got like a chapter in, and there was a party, and I remember there were like multiple swearing, but not just like F-word swearing, and there was like an orgy, and I was like, there's nothing left to read. And I was like, I And I was just so distressed. And anyway, I've come back and forth, and I've ended up reading tons and I finally found authors outside of, and that, I was in high school. So, junior high, maybe. I think I was in junior high at that point. But I found different things. But through high school and especially into college, I was so busy, I didn't read for pleasure very much. And I remember I was on campus. I was just started dating Jared. We started dating, we met in September and we started dating in October. And in November, I was talking to Jared and I was like, it was the first week of November. And I was like, Jared, do you know who this Harry Potter kid is? He's so popular. Everybody went to his party for Halloween and I don't even know who this is because I'd heard multiple people talking about the Harry Potter party. And so I thought this was a student on campus that everybody, I was like, I don't know this kid. I guess I'm not a popular kid. It was a huge campus. So, but to have so many people from at my job and in my classes and different buildings around campus and everybody went to a Harry Potter party. I'm like, who the heck is this kid? And he was like, you don't know who Harry Potter is? And I was, no. His parents were very, very into reading. And I don't know who got the first book, but he also had younger siblings. So maybe they also. And then his sister had served an LDS mission in Ireland. And so his parents had gone over and been in that area. And they even got the British versions of it, which has some changed words and things like that. But anyway, that was the first Christmas present he gave me was the first Harry Potter book.
Oh my gosh.
Actually reading that got me back into reading.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, that's cool. So I read a whole bunch again and I was reading a lot. And I read The Lord of the Rings and I just was reading a ton. And then we started a business and I was a new mom and reading went by the wayside. Mm-hmm. And I had a friend hand me Twilight. She was like, you'll love it. And to this day, I'm not really sure why Cammie thought I would love it. Mm-hmm, because I'm not sure. I don't know. I liked rom-coms, but I don't know what it was about that moment that she was like, you're going to love it. But I read it and I did like it. And I think at that point, just like when Jared gave me the first Harry Potter, the fourth one had just come out or was just about to come out. So I got to read some in excitement, it's waiting until the whole series is out so you can binge it. And in this, I think New Moon had just come out, which is the second one, but the third one had not come out yet. And so I read those and I did like it. It was fun. And there was a forum that I found called Twilight Moms. Uh-huh. And it was I think when I joined, there were 60 of them. And it was a forum, which I don't know if you even remember those.
I remember
online,
those. I used to run a forum.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So it was just, discussion topics or whatever, but it was women who wanted to talk about Twilight, not to a bunch of teenagers who liked it.
Yes.
But what it really was, yes, we had a discussion thread for Twilight, but what it really was, it was a book club and Stephenie Meyer was in it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so she would be like, oh my gosh, you guys, I just read this advanced reader copy of this book and you're going to love it. Or here's one you should read.
Wow.
And we were all giving recommendations. So there were lots of good books that I got to read in that group and we had lots of conversations. And anyway, we got to a point, there was a dad that found us and he was like, please tell me why this book, I hate it. Uh-huh. I read it and I hate it. But I read it because my teenage daughter loved it and she wants to read the rest. And I think it's just trash. And I remember thinking about that for a long time. And he hated Bella. He hated how she was. And I was like, okay, here's the thing. She's a teenage girl. Mm-hmm. And she's a teenage girl with a mom who is a little bit flighty, which means she's mostly been a mature kid her whole life. And now she has somebody that she really, really likes. And I will tell you that a teenage girl's brain goes obsessive because of
Yes, it
how
does.
the wiring is.
Yes.
Developmentally, how the wiring and how the chemicals are, that is just how the brain works.
Yeah.
And so it gets obsessive. And I'm not saying obsessive is good, but I'm also not saying it's bad. And that is the same thing that happens to her.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, well, I heard in the second book that she basically becomes so depressed she doesn't do anything. And like, yeah, that's true. For 5 months, she checks out. It's like blank pages.
Yeah.
And that is upsetting. And she gets out of it. Now, at first, she gets out of it just because she's seeking that danger, right? And because the adrenaline pumping, and she gets this imagination of what it would be like if he were still there. So that's why she keeps going for it. But she also comes out of it because of connection with another human. She also comes out of it because she starts to see the world again outside of herself. And that is literally what depression is like. And we do get that way when we are grieving. And that is also okay. As far as she was concerned, she was grieving. And not just grieving this one person, but grieving what she thought her future was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And a whole group of people that she loved.
Yeah.
Like, that is something that why would I judge a person for how they're trying to deal with that? And also, maybe it just gives you more insight.
Mm-hmm.
So, sure, if your daughter reads it in a vacuum and what she walks away from Twilight is, I can become obsessed with an older man, then yeah, that's all bad. However, what a great discussion set. It's a wonderful starting point. If there's something that she does that disturbs you, that you don't want your kid to do, well, talk about that.
Yeah.
But we don't have to pretend like we can get out of that what we want to get out of that.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
Yeah.
that was a point where I really was like, huh. Obviously, there are books that I think are terrible in the world. There are, people who write terrible things that are trying to spread hate or, any of the isms that are horrible. And those exist.
They do.
And I also don't want to pretend they don't exist.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And I just saw a video the other day of somebody in one of our local libraries. I don't know. They said Nampa and Meridian, Boise. I don't know which one, but and there's this huge assault on all of our libraries right now about censoring the books, and should a teenage boy? This was in the teenage section, and they're talking about Grindr, and should we explain to them how to get on Grindr? And I'm like, and they're asking this librarian this, and it's supposed to be like expose reporting, that like vigilante social media stuff. And I'm just looking at that and I'm like, never in 1 million years do I want my child to read that book.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. Highly sexualized. Yes. And the library is a reservoir of information, and it's not all for everybody.
It is not.
It's all the things.
Yeah.
And if I send my kid to the library and say, go get books, and they come home with a big stack of books, and I don't pay attention to what those books are, that's not on the library. Nope. That's on me. Mm-hmm. I don't expect other people to parent my children. And if we can't accept the fact that there is a plethora of information out there that I don't want my children to have, which is true, then I have a real problem, because every single child I know, maybe there's some who live in Amish country or whatnot who won't, but otherwise, every single child I know will turn 18 and get a phone.
They will.
If they don't have it before that, which the stats are staggeringly obvious that the majority of children are going to have a phone way earlier than they should. That is a doorway into the entire world of information. So instead of being mad at the library that there might be something you don't want your kid to read, maybe it's a great opportunity to work with your children and talk about not everything is for everybody. Yes. And let's be careful about what information we find.
Yeah.
And consume.
Exactly. Because it's not the responsibility of somebody at the library, for example, to take care of that and judge. Like, no, that is on the parent and on the family to have those discussions together.
And hey, I love the sweet, innocent love stories. I love them. It's why I liked YA to begin with, because YA of 20 years ago was not the sexualized landscape that it is now. And I love romance stories. Even now, I love reading romance stories. And it is hard to find ones that aren't veering heavily into sexualized content. And some of it gets pornographic, to be frank, but some people think porn is only visual, which they've actually found that for the women's brain, reading it, because so much for the women is emotional and feeling in their brain, that they don't need the visual, where men are more visually stimulated. So it is an interesting discussion, because there is a lot to say about the damage that porn can have. I never thought this is where our conversation would go, Stephenie.
Look at us.
Steph, it is not what I was expecting. But I will say this anyway, because I will be outspoken about it. But anyway, there is a lot of information out there about pornography. And on the one hand, do I think everybody is going to become addicted to porn? No, I don't. But what I do think is that it shifts our perspective about intimacy quite a bit.
I believe that as well, yes.
No matter what. And now we're dealing with television shows that have nudity and highly sexualized content. I mean, it used to be like you would go to an R-rated movie, you might expect it. But otherwise, you know, the expectation wasn't there. Now the expectation is, I mean, it's in pretty much everything until like maybe PG-13 and the TV-14 or whatever, but anything else, and the majority of things seem to be falling on that side of things now. And it is interesting. I think it does shift how we view and connect with other people. But regardless of all of that, in general, porn is scary because of how connected. My mom used to work. I'm sorry, I talk in parentheticals, so here's another parenthesis.
Okay.
But my mom used to work with addiction recovery and sexual addiction and pornography addiction.
Oh, wow.
And she worked with couples a lot. So she would work with both the person who's dealing with the addiction and somebody who loved them. And that is one of the hardest places to work in all the world.
I bet.
And in the same way that like anorexia, which is something like I used to work with eating disorder populations because I studied rec therapy in college. And so in that similar thing, like we have to eat to live, right? So if you have an addiction having to do with food, whether it's overeating or undereating or eating and binging, whatever it is, that's really hard to manage because you have to eat to live. And it's a similar thing actually when it comes to sex and intimacy, because humans crave that. Not just physically, but emotionally, we do. And so, especially if you're in a relationship, it's there, right? You're gonna have sex. So then now it's on your mind, but then does that mean you go find it? I don't know. Anyway, it's a hard world, and that's a hard world to live in. It's a hard world to recover in. It's a hard world to help. And one of the things in all of my studying and looking at it, and my mom was working in it, and then I got a little, I know now I have ADHD. I didn't know this for a long time, but I do now. But then I didn't know that, but I got very hyper focused on it, learned a lot about it. And one of the things is that it's pretty much impossible for the porn industry, as far as like the websites, the production companies and all of that stuff, those places where the money is happening are absolutely linked to the sex trafficking industry. So even if everybody in the film is willing and happy to do it, and even if it's a couple or a single person who's going to watch it and isn't going to have all the negative detriments that are there, although there are so many. But we know that the money is associated. The money's connected. They know that. And so it's hard for me to say that any porn is okay, no matter how much I want to be here, there is. And I'm not even sure I totally believe that, because I know so many actors who did a nude scene and later regretted it so much, but didn't feel like they had a lot of choices because they just so badly want to make it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people who get into porn, and yes, there's something feeling empowering about your body, but I still think that there is a level of, I'm just not sure that all things being equal, that would be the choice if they didn't feel like they had more choices. Anyway, the reality is it's connected to the sex trafficking. They know that.
Yeah.
They follow the money. They know what's happening. And that industry is so bad and getting so much worse. I just could never, ever, ever condone it.
No.
So and that's not a super popular opinion to talk about, but because people want to talk about the morality of porn, and well, they all say they were all fine and happy and they were all kept safe and they want to be doing it. Okay. And adults can consume whatever they want to consume. That's true too. Be careful what you consume and how it changes your brain, because it will. But that's true in any area. But just for the very fact that it's connected back to the first thing makes me say I just could never. I could never. But all that being said, all of that information is out there in the world.
Yeah.
It is readily available. And
it is. And I think it's our responsibility, going back to the kids piece.
Yeah.
Our responsibility as either parents, which I am not a parent, but I'm an auntie. And so our responsibility to help but help guide these kids to make the right choices.
Yeah.
It's not a teacher. It's not a librarian. It's us as the guardians who need to help guide those children in the right direction.
Definitely. Well, and also have discussions about it.
Yes.
I still have kids who don't want to talk about sex. My children are older teens down to 7 and a 22-year-old, right? 7 to 22. And I have 5 children. And the older ones, they are going to blush and be annoyed and don't want to talk to me about it. And I will have a frank discussion with you about it.
Good.
I will have a frank discussion with you about it every day.
Good.
And it won't be, hey, guess what? Sex is bad. I will never have that discussion with you, because it's not. It's amazing. And it creates an intimacy between two people that is wonderful. So knowing that, who are you going to choose to have that with? Or are you going to have it inside of a relationship that's manufactured and fake, and that it's going to feel cheap and not have what it could be? You have to decide. And you will have to decide. That opportunity will come to you, and it will be up to you to choose that. So I'm going to tell you all the truths about it, and then you're going to have to go choose as you live your life. Like, I've even told them, we are Mormon. We don't drink. We don't smoke, which that one I'm like, no. Don't ever. And also drugs. Don't ever. There's, but I'm like, drinking, lots of people do it. If you really want to, that's going to be up to you. But also don't be dumb about it.
Yeah. Yes.
And I'm like, here's the thing. Your brain is still developing. We know your brain is going to be developing even past 21. So if I were you, knowing what we know, I probably wouldn't add alcohol to my brain chemistry until my brain is done developing. But it's up to you what you're going to decide. However, don't do it before you're 21, because that's just the law.
That's illegal.
And we want to be lawful.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if you go to Europe, you'll get a chance sooner, but also you'll be younger and therefore probably dumber. So still think about that. Like, don't be dumb,
Yeah.
And that, like, I have that conversation with my kids about a lot of things, like even modesty, which dress however you want. It's your body. I want you to love it. But you can't be an idiot.
No.
Because guess what? How you dress, everybody else is around you seeing it. And that's fine, because you get to choose. You wear whatever you want. But then if you're upset that somebody makes an assumption or a thought or has something about you in their brain, Well, that's you being dumb. Is it right for them to judge you off of it? No. But are you being an idiot if you think that they're not going to do that, or that they, just because they shouldn't, that they, like, don't be an idiot.
Yeah.
We have to be aware of what messages we're putting out into the world, whether that's in storytelling, whether that's with our, self, with our body, with the things that we say, with the things that we post online. Be aware of what you're putting out there. And do you have the right to do whatever you want? Debatable. Yes, you do. We all have our agency, right? You are going to get to do that. And as an adult, you will have an opportunity to do that. Before that, I get to have a say, but you will have an opportunity to just do what you want. And please don't be dumb.
Yeah.
Don't be naively dumb and also self-righteously dumb about it. Because, well, here's another soapbox that would make me not very popular, but I'll say it anyway. When people started saying, when triggered became a very popular thing to talk about, being triggered, trigger warnings. It's not that I don't disagree. Like, trigger warnings make sense to me to some extent. And I do not want to purposefully go out and hurt somebody's feelings.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that is on me to be aware of that could happen. However, if somebody gets triggered, that actually, unless I did it on purpose, I can't do anything about that, because the triggered person, that's an internal thing. And what I tell my kids is, you can't be triggered if you're not cocked. If the gun is cocked, ready to be fired, then it can get fired. And it's on us when we have a trigger happen to go, why am I triggered over that? What has me in a ready to be triggered position that I'm triggered over that? Because it's something I have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And expecting other people to take care of my thing is not how I want to be. And it's not how I want my kids to be. And I think we kind of live in this world right now where a lot of stuff gets pushed out on because we have the right to be whoever we want to be. We want the world to cater to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a strange expectation, because we can ask for respect and we can ask for these things, and expecting respect and expecting people to treat us kindly, which I hope we all do, is yes, please. And I don't want to walk around being upset all the time.
No.
And I don't want you to do that either. But I can't control your feelings. I can't. And I just think it's something we need to be really careful of. So when triggers started getting thrown around all the time, I started getting really overwhelmed by that, mm-hmm. because we can't move through life in fear of triggering other people, because we aren't in control of whether or not they're cocked.
Nope. We can only control ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing that has done that is very interesting to me. So I have kids who I have taught since they were little, like, I'm not mad if the milk gets spilled, but I am mad if you watch it soak into the carpet and stand there like you don't know what to do next. Go get a towel. Go get a paper towel. Go do something.
That is a beautiful way to put that.
Right. So I want you to see what's happening around the world, and then I want you to take action. Be aware. So if there's one kid being rude to another kid, if you can't control the kid who's being rude, you can control being nice to the other kid. So go do that. Mm-hmm. I want my kids to be aware of what's happening around them. And so I hope that for all of us. And I hope that we can all be aware of the things that are happening. When Jared and I do improv, we'll do sometimes these games that are guessing games where everything is communicated through mime and gibberish.
Okay.
And we are really, 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 really weirdly good at it. Okay. So in very limited amount of time.
Okay, let me ask you really fast.
Okay.
You're really weirdly good at it together or also with other people?
Also with
joining the
other
team?
people.
Okay.
But here's the thing that is really interesting when Jared and I do it together. We both have worked, I mean, we've been doing these games for 25 years. And the thing is, we always talk about how listening, and we are teaching people this, listening is not just with our ears.
It's our body.
It's our whole body. And so when somebody is giving you messaging, it's everything. It's what is the emotion that's coming?
Mm-hmm.
How, like, even the words may not be coming out, but there's so much we can get. Now, that being said, like, they've done research and teenagers are not that great at reading a facial expression. They struggle, when I ask people to come up with emotions, you know, they try to go weird and they're like trepidatious and, you know, all these things. And I'm like, man, it all comes down to some pretty basic ones. But even that, I mean, resting bitch face has become a thing because guess what? Some people just have a straight line or even a downward turned mouth when they're not actively smiling. That's just a thing. So I can't assume what it is you're thinking and feeling. I can't. But I can be aware that I can pass information about what I'm thinking and feeling, or I can be misleading.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so it's some things to think about when all of that comes to be. All that being said, coming back to the awareness, like my children I really want them to be aware of the messages they're putting out, the messages that they're receiving. What kind of action are they going to take? And I think we're all very scared of offending anybody. And I was trying to explain this to my kids. Like my girls hate going to Costco. They hate it with all of their
heart. I don't really like going to Costco
I know
either.
Lots of people don't. And I love Costco because there's so many awesome deals. There's going to be a good deal. Plus, I'm probably going to run into at least one person I know. But that's also one of the reasons why my kids hate Costco, because they do not want me to stop and talk to anybody. And it's not because they really have a problem with me talking to the person. It's because they're worried about me blocking an aisleway, which I get. On the other hand, what is the worst that happens? Somebody has to say, excuse me?
True.
Or somebody has to move a cart around. And my kids could become obsessive about that, like stressed out about it. One in particular. And she is so worried about inconveniencing people. And I was trying to figure out, we were talking about this. We were talking about Costco. We were talking about some other things. And she just true anxiety and stress, obsessive response about inconveniencing other people. And I was like, okay, kid, how do I explain this? I'm like, let's pretend the whole world is a swimming pool. It's like one giant swimming pool. And you are trying to get from here to there. There is no way for you to get from here to there without making a ripple, because your very existence will give ripples. Mm-hmm. Sometimes something in your life is going to be big enough that you're going to do more than a ripple. It might even be a wave, because it's just life. It's you responding to life. You know, if someone's dealing with a massive hard thing or a massive good thing, it'll be a bigger thing that's coming out. And do I want you to go around purposefully splashing everybody? Absolutely not. But I don't want you to be scared of moving from here to there because your existence is going to take up space. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. You have to be able to make a ripple. You have to. That's life. And being scared of making a ripple, what if it's the wrong ripple? What if it hits somebody just wrong and you made a wrong move and then that ripple, guess what? That's also life.
It is.
We have to be able to make ripples. It has to be okay. And sometimes we will even make waves. And that'll be awesome. Sometimes we'll do it on purpose. It doesn't mean we'll be targeting somebody, but sometimes we have to do that. That is good. And guess what else? I don't know if you've ever floated in a lake or the ocean before, but when it's super calm, that is lovely. And there is a peaceful wonderfulness to it. And when the giant boat wave comes and you get to go up and down floating on it and everybody's giggling and having a good time, that is also awesome because life is riding the wave.
It is. I love how you put that.
So yeah, that's my, like with my kids, I don't want them to be scared of making a wave.
And so what was your daughter's response to that scenario? That I think that's beautiful. Like the way you describe that, that's awesome. I've never heard it put that way, but it makes so much sense.
Well, and I mean, she got it, but she was a teenager. So, you know, but this is my oldest. And she said to me later, it was like maybe 8 months ago or so. She was like, Mom, there's a lot of little lessons you taught me or things you would say to me. And I would hear you. And it wasn't that I didn't believe you, but it's like I didn't really get it until either I did it or, I think she was talking about like grateful journaling. Every time my kids are talking about how sad they are, I'm like, if one of them is dealing with that, I'm like, okay, grateful journal. Let's talk. What do you love? And I'll be like, they'll come home and tell me all the terrible things that happened at school that day. And we'll hear that, accept that. Thank you. Okay. I'm sorry. That's rough. That would be hard to deal with. Okay, cool. You've now told me 6 things that were terrible. I need you to tell me some things that were awesome.
Yes.
And they're like, nothing was awesome. I hated it. And I'm like, okay, so let's just talk about it. Did you talk to anybody? Well, yeah, I talked to this person. Did you learn anything about them? Okay, yeah, I learned this thing. Okay, that's cool. Like, do you feel like you know them better? Yeah. Okay, that's a good thing. That's one positive thing. What else? And it's a hard thing to learn. And it's a hard thing to do. When we're doing improv, we will often start with a win circle.
I like
and
that.
Everybody stands in a circle and says something awesome. Sometimes life is hard and it is stressful to try to come up with something good. But I don't care if your win is that you got to eat Lucky Charms for dinner because you love Lucky Charms. That is still a win if we make it so.
Absolutely.
The same kid, when she was 14, maybe, she was like, I would love to go on one of those talent shows, but I would never get picked. And I'm like, why do you say that? And she's like, I was like, you're super talented. And she's like, meh, I don't have a story. And I was like, yeah, you don't. You're just a boring oldest sister in a Caucasian family in Idaho. Like, there's nothing interesting about you. Although, when you were 11, you got diagnosed with hypermobility so significantly that you deal with pain daily.
Ooh.
And you have to choose to get up and do it anyway. And that's hard. And remember that one time, like, you took a part in a play that had no lines, but you just, like, you thought, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it all the way. I just want to do this. I'm going to give my whole heart. And you did. And then that stood out so much to the directors. And then you got cast as Annie in their next play.
Whoa.
I'm like, that was kind of cool.
Dream role.
Right.
I'm way too old now.
I know.
Oh my, she got cast as Annie?
Yeah. And I'm like, it's interesting to me how that's the thing. Again, coming back to like, what's the moral of the story? What's the message? What lesson did you learn? The reality is we all have things, you know, like Jared talked about one time that he's like, I don't have any trauma. Like, people talk about having trauma. I just don't have any trauma. I was like, yeah, you don't. Except, wasn't it really hard when your grandma passed away? And he was like, well, yeah, but she was older. I'm like, yeah, but you struggled with that, right? And he's like, yeah. It's like, did she just peacefully die and said goodbye and walked into the hills? And he's like, well, no, she was sick and, you know, it was hard. And I'm like, honey, that is trauma. Just because you've dealt with it and it seems normal because we all deal with death, doesn't mean that that's not trauma. Like, we all have those things, and they shape us.
They do.
And he has learned through his years of being able to have an experience and then look at it and go, what do I do with this thing? And then how do I move forward? So he's not still carrying it as an open wound. So to him, he had no trauma. But we all have trauma because, again, we're all in the giant swimming pool of life and some waves have hit us.
Yeah.
Like, we are all dealing with things always. And it all matters just in how you tell the story. You know, like I had this killer high school experience. It was so awesome. When I went into my high school years, I met this group of friends. There's a train.
There's a train.
I met this group of friends. Like, for the first time, I felt like I was part of a friend group, and I was like, I got super connected to these people, and it was wonderful to have friends. And I even went to the reunion, 10 years later or whatever, and I hadn't seen any of them in a long time. And I walked in, and everybody knew who I was, and like, I just had people, and I'm like, oh, that's so awesome. Great story. If I tell you the other parts of it, when I was in junior high, I had two friends who hated each other, and I kept working so hard to get them to be friends because I wanted us all to be friends together. Mm-hmm. And eventually they became friends. Mm-hmm. And then they weren't friends with me anymore. Mm-hmm. And I don't have any idea why. I never was told. I don't know. And even one of their moms found me once and apologized because she had no idea what happened.
Wow.
And I was devastated. And I got into 9th grade and I stopped talking. I just didn't. I had no social life. And I didn't hang out with people. I didn't go to anybody's house. I didn't talk to anybody on the phone. I just, nothing. And my parents were really worried about me to the point where even if money was tight and whatever, by October of that year, my mom was like, we got to do something. Do you want to take dance classes again? Mm-hmm. And they got me into a dance program. And that was hard. Like, I ended up joining, I had some natural skills, so I ended up getting put up in a higher group than I had been, but it was all these kids who'd been dancing together for years. So I never really totally connected to them, which was fine. But I felt very, very, very alone. And I was awkward, skinny, braces, curly hair that I didn't know how to do. If I straightened it, it was like puffy back. And if I did it curly, it was brushed puffy. And nothing. I was skinny. I had huge feet. Looking back, I'm like, it was like I was Ronald McDonald's with braces. I don't know. It was so awkward. And I was just, I was doing well in school. There was a girl who I talked to one day. Our teacher didn't show up for class. And so we talked for 45 minutes. And I had known her, but I hadn't known her. And we really connected. And a few days later, on her way to school, she was hit by a car and passed away. And I felt like, man, friendship is just not in the cards for me. And the summer between junior high and high school, I just was like, I hate that I don't know how to do my hair. Mm-hmm. So I went to one of my sisters who would perm her hair so that it would be curly. And I'm like, Tiffany, I don't know how to do my hair. She's like, you need to use gel and you need to blow dry it upside down. And I'm like, okay, whatever. So that's what I started doing. And I finally figured it out. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to a high school where hardly anybody knows me. Just a small neighborhood is moving to a high school. Everybody around and who went to junior high with us goes to a different high school. So hardly anybody knows me. So I'm starting over. If I'm going to start over, who do I want to be? I get to choose that. Who am I going to be when I go into high school? And I spent the summer thinking about that. And I remember I went to a summer camp that was kind of associated with my church. And there were all youth kids 12 to 18 years old at this camp. And then we were all mixed up in groups. And so people I didn't know, all different ages. And there was this one kid who was in our group. He was 18. And I am a problem solver. And I was smart, and it was at a basic training camp. So we had all these like physical things we were doing and obstacle courses we were trying to get through, and, you know, as our little group and stuff. And so I would come up with these ideas, and he was the leader, like a de facto leader, just because of his personality, but he was a good leader. And so it was like, okay, what's your idea, Nichole? Okay, let's think about this. And so he and I got to kind of be friends through that. And I remember sitting and eating dinner with him one night, and then he walked away, and some girls who didn't never talk to me in junior high were like, why were you sitting with him? I'm like, well, he's in my group. They're like, do you know who it is? I'm like, I mean, I know him now. And they're like, yeah, but he was he was student body president. It was a swim person. He played basketball or something, maybe not basketball, I can't remember, a couple of sports. He was like uber popular at this other high school that I wasn't going to be going to, but he had just graduated, and he was like the guy there. And I was like, he thinks I'm worthy of being a friend. Interesting. And while I had been thinking about who do I want to be, and then here's this guy who was like so open and saw me, and I was like, who do I want to be? And so I finally decided that I wanted to be the girl, if people were to describe me, the girl who was always smiling, which I was in charge of.
Yep.
And I wanted to be the girl who was friends with everybody, which I was in charge of. Because I can be a friend to everybody. I can't control whether or not they are my friend, but I can control those two things.
Yes.
And so that's what I went into school with, that mindset. And it was so hard. I did get my braces off. So maybe that helped with the smiling thing, maybe. But I was not a natural smiler. And so I was like, okay, it's going to be so much work. And also people think you're weird if you're smiling. Even in high school, like especially in high school, maybe, I don't know. But I was like, okay, I'm going to smile. I'm going to do this. This is so awkward. But I went in and did it. And I mean, yeah, it was hard. But I started doing that. And I went at every class, and I would try to find people and talk to them, and I would be their friend. And there was one girl who would run a little bit slower in gym class, so I would run with her. And there was another girl who was struggling with something in one of my other classes, and I would help her with that. And in another class, and I did this in junior high too, but I especially did this in high school. I remember I would watch the students as much as the teachers, because I could hear what the teacher was saying, and then I could see if the students understood. And if they didn't, I would ask a question so the teacher would have to explain it differently, like a specific question to help clarify what they just said. Because I figured out what they just said, but I could tell other people didn't. And that always stressed me out on behalf of the other people. And that's that awareness. And it's just something that I think has mattered to me for my whole life, but of being able to see if people are picking up what you're putting down. And so I started doing that a lot, because people want to, if you have to be in high school and learn something, it's easier if you can actually learn it. So I started doing that a lot and asking like questions for other people. Anyway, so it was I think October, like early October. School had been in for about 6 weeks, and I was standing in a bank of lockers, and we had this huge wide hallway, and there were just lockers parallel to each other, but perpendicular down the hallway. And so I was in my area of the locker, and I heard somebody on this side come walking up and go, "Hey, have you seen Nichole? I thought her locker was right here." And the other kid goes, "No, I don't know who Nichole is." And they're like, "You know, the girl that's always smiling at everyone and is friends with everybody." And he was like, "Oh yeah, Nichole, she's on the other side." I that moment is like, I had the power to be and do exactly what I set out to do. Those were the literal words that he used to describe me that made another person recognize who I was. Like, not even people that I was super close to. And it changed my whole perspective about who we are and what we get to decide we contribute. Because we get to contribute.
We do.
And we get to decide that. And so it makes me more aware. It also sometimes makes me more overwhelmed because I feel like I want to make a good choice. But the reminder is you don't have to make a good choice. You just make a choice, take an action. It doesn't really matter. But take a step. You can always take a step slightly to the right if you are a little off course, right?
Absolutely.
But taking the step matters. But that really changed how I think about the contribution that people make and what we get to contribute and do for the world. And so when I think about that and I think about the kind of stories I want to tell or the things that mattered to me, I'm going to tell the stories that I feel like are going to add good to the world. And I struggle sometimes because there's such stupid stuff out there. Like my husband will send me a reel and I'm like, why did you send me this reel? And he's like, it's hilarious. I was like, it is, but somebody wasted time making that. I'm like, no, it's fine. If it's bringing joy or laughter, it's fine. It's not breaking anything.
Nope.
And I believe in the power of joy and laughter. So it's fine. Even if I don't find it funny, Jared sure did.
Somebody did.
Right? And that's okay. So I think as long as I don't love the stories that are for art's sake, bleh, spare me. I don't care. I don't care about, like, sometimes people do improv and they want it to be so absurdist. And I'm like, that's improv for other improvisers. That's not a gift for the audience. It's not even a gift for me. Like, I don't love it, but not that absurd can't be good, but if it's because it's absurd, if that's the why, then I don't care. Absurd is fine, but what's my result? Like, what am I putting back out into the world?
Yep. I like that. I like absurd myself, but it's like there are so many different reasons. I have one final question for you.
Yeah.
I'm watching our time together as well. Okay,
Yeah.
good. We're good. One final question. When you take away all the labels and all the titles, who are you, Nichole, at your core?
That's such a good question because it's so easy to live inside of our labels or the things that we do to define us. I remember watching James Van Der Beek. Shortly before he died, he put out a video talking about how much he was coming to figure out his value without what he could do. Because he used to define himself as an actor. And then he met his wife and husband, provider, still an actor, a storyteller, a father, a responsible landowner. They had some property to take care of the property. He couldn't do any of those things. In fact, I think he was living in an apartment so he could get treatment somewhere different than where he lived and away from his family. He can't act anymore. He's struggling as he's dying. And then he's thinking, what value do I have? And he said, it just is. I just am. As I am, that is my value. And he was talking about God, which I also relate to, of value as a child of God. And I've spent a lot of time in the LDS church. Sometimes we'll talk about something called the pride cycle. And you can see it in scriptures, right? Where like people get really successful and affluent and they start to get prideful about it. And then they have a fall basically and then come down and around and and it's this cycle that happens that we fall and then we start to a lot of times be blessed or have good things happen. And then we start to be like, and it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. And I thought about pride so much. And I think because I was afraid to be prideful and I wanted to be humble. And I was thinking about how to teach this to some teenagers. And I started to realize that we think of pride and humility incorrectly, that they are opposites, but they are not. The opposite of pride is self-hate. And when we can truly see who we are and who other people are and higher power, which there's too many reasons. I just don't believe in so many coincidences to lead us to a point of completely that there's no design to our universe, which is why I believe in a creator. There's just like the astronomical odds of it being the way that it is exactly without any kind of something else. Too mind-boggling for me to accept. So I have to accept in my brain that there is some level of purposeful creation. So that being said, when there is a balance between recognizing my value as self and what I'm capable of, and also that there's all these other people who are of the same, that's humility. That's the moment of recognizing that. It's why I don't have a problem asking somebody for help. It doesn't hit my pride. It's why I don't mind talking about the mastectomy that I had or being very open about things because I don't really get embarrassed and I'm not precious about things. I really don't have a lot of secrets of any kind. And I know not everybody is comfortable talking about stuff. Like some people really want things to be very private. Not everybody needs the world's all their info. I really don't care. I told Jared, like when I die, you can spell out exactly how I died. Like, just tell them, like, she died of this and this
detail.
and this. Because people are curious, because it matters to them, right? Like, they want to know how it relates to them. And every time somebody dies, especially somebody that you know, you're like, what happened? How did that? Like, we get stressed out about that, both for ourselves because we're mortal beings, but also because, like, this person mattered to me and I need to try to order that in my head. And that's just how our brains are. And so I'm not precious about any of that kind of stuff. And I just don't get embarrassed that easily. And I sure have some funny, embarrassing stories, but they're not like I made mistakes and there's not much that I wouldn't talk to you about unless it's connected to somebody else who may not want their stuff shared. But I just don't mind talking about things. And a huge part of that is because I'm not going to hold on to the self-hate of it. I'm not going to be embarrassed or feel ashamed. And I'm not going to hold on to this prideful need to look this way. This balance of I am. Mm-hmm. And sometimes something happens and I'm like, ugh, Nichole, what are you doing? Or, ugh, you wasted a whole day. And then I'm like, however, you did finish an entire book in one day. So good on you. Like, I want to be in that balanced place. And so I don't want to live in negativity and I don't want to live in fear. And I feel like those are what happens in either of these places. And I want to have the balance. And of course, in my brain, it's like a pendulum of we swing and we'll start to get over. But I think if we start to recognize that and try and get ourselves back into balance of I have value. In my church growing up, two of the terms were a divine nature and an individual worth. We all have a divine nature and we all have an individual worth, just as is. So just me, without any titles, without any of the things that I do. As hard as that is, because we want output, we want to matter, we want to have made a difference. And that's, I think, the struggle of our lives is love who we are and do good. but love who we are, even if we don't get to the good.
Yeah.
I mean, even if we don't do the good we were expecting.
That's beautiful. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And
You're welcome.
Thank you for being so vulnerable today.
Yeah,
this
you're
was
welcome.
a great conversation.
Well, thanks for letting me come talk.
Absolutely. And thank you all for watching, and join us next time for another episode of The Essence of You.